focused on solutions for Tier 2 and smaller Tier 1, Tier 3 carriers. I think we bring a really unique networking opportunity. And I thought I might just touch base on the major policy issues that are going to be critical to this 4G world. These issues will be critical in the business decisions and the technology decisions that allow us to move to 4G LTE. And I highlight, interoperability, data roaming, device exclusivity, U.S. reform, spectrum, obviously issue, and 700 megahertz as it plays a role in the rollout of 4G. And next slide, please. Thank you. And I thought it'd be interesting to go back in time just a little and talk about the Pitfalls. Many of you may remember this game a few years back. We won't go that far back, but there are a lot of pitfalls to the pathway to 4G. And the FCC's reduction of the USF funding and the USF reform program has even created more uncertainties, more business uncertainties on how you move forward. There will be a 20% reduction in USF funding each year, at least expected, over the next 5 years. And this is putting rural markets at extreme risk, and that's one of the areas that we'll be focusing on this year to enhance funding opportunities for wireless carriers. But we're going to need people like the ones you'll hear from today to help us figure out what that is. Interoperability, this is, what is it? How does it impact this decision to move forward on 4G LTE? It has huge impacts on handset availability, device availability, data roaming. All of these impact on the cost of service. What we're trying to help the community create is an ecosystem for 4G that's an open ecosystem that allows all our carriers to have access to it. This is one of the most interesting factors you'll learn about today. You'll hear some real interesting concepts and ideas how Clear Sky, ZTE, and Grapevine can help you find this pathway. The next slide, if you would, please, and I'll just wait a second for it to come up. Dean, if you could get the next slide. I think it's spectrum. It takes just a little while to load here. Here you go. I bring this up for two reasons. One, this is the chosen spectrum to deploy 4G LTE in rural America, and quite frankly, I wanted you to keep this spectrum plan in mind as we move forward, because it will have an impact, spectrum and equipment. It will have a huge impact on our going forward. It also has, as you'll note with the separate band plans in band 12, band 17, also the upper spectrum, band 13, it'll have a huge impact on who your roaming partners could be. And as you know, everybody's selling a national product. If you don't have a national reach and scope and breadth, you're going to have a hard time selling your product. So keep this band plan in mind as we go through the process and the discussion today, and I think you'll see why we consider it so important moving forward. And next slide, please. This is my opportunity to pitch our next event that RCA is having in Orlando. It's where Be Where the Carriers Are. If you'd like to join Sprint, C-Spire, Altel, and Telos, Light Squared, Metro PCS, Bluegrass Cellular, iWireless, GCI, and about 75 to 80 other carriers, here's a great place for you to come and learn more about the pathway to 4G, the pitfalls and impediments to moving forward in the 4G world. And next slide. I'll put a plug in here for our own Jeff Amucci and the RCR. We have a pre-conference that is free. Obviously, the RCA conference itself is hopefully you'll register and stay with that, but we do have a free pre-conference from not only the companies you see here, but also RCR will be doing a pre-conference seminar, and we'll give you more of what I think you will want to hear after this presentation is over, and is how do we get 4G LTE in the United States. And I'm delighted to join 3 of our members and our strategic partner RCR and bringing this to you today. So, Jeff, why don't over to Dean, and we'll let Dean just. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thanks, Jeff. Here's what we're going to be running through today. On the agenda here, we're going to run through the idea of LTE. Are we on the right path with it? We're going to talk about the components of the LTE network, the core and the surrounding support systems. Then we're going to spend quite a bit of time on device and roaming ecosystems, because in many cases this is the tail that wags the LTE dog. And then we're also going to be looking at some real-world issues when it comes time to install and roll out your LTE network. Now, to get a sense of our audience and get a sense of each other, I'm going to ask Jeff to bring up a poll. And if you would take just a minute and click on our poll here. All right, Jeff, we got the poll up. All right, well, while that's underway, I want to talk about the objectives of our session. We're going to look at the worldwide adoption of LTE. It's pretty extraordinary. We're going to look at and help you understand the system components that make up an LTE network. We're going to review options for devices and roaming, and we're also going to discuss some key points in planning and build-out.
Okay, Daniel, get ready to close the poll. If anyone has a chance, please go ahead and vote as appropriate. Last chance. I'm going to close it now, Dean. Thank you.
All right. If we look at what's going on with LTE, it's a very interesting perspective on the industry. We started in the 1G world with amps, and 2G was a proliferation of technologies. 3G, the world began to settle back into what ended up being 3 major worldwide technologies. And then in 4G, we had WiMAX, that's kind of faded away. And now LTE is by far the primary vehicle for 4G. So because of this realignment and alignment, the worldwide adoption rates are pretty phenomenal. In the fine print there is perhaps the most important number off of this pretty busy slide with a lot of data, and that's 49 commercial deployments of LTE in 29 different countries. So if you're wondering if LTE really is the horse to ride, it is clear that the rest of the world is voting with their networks. Why so? What makes it so much better? Well, a variety of reasons. Higher peak data rates, 150 megabits for downlink, 50 megabits per second for uplink in a 20 megahertz bandwidth. We might not, as an industry, choose to give our end users that kind of speeds, but it shows the capabilities of the network. It has higher spectrum efficiency, much more flexible spectrum allocation, better user experience, and it runs on a lot of different frequencies. From an Airlink perspective, I'm not going to go into details here, but there's new modulation techniques that pack as much possible data over the airwaves as possible. And it also implements something called MIMO, which allows multiple send and receive channels from multiple antennas from the device and the tower. So with LTE, we can think about it in a series of concentric circles. First of all, there's the core components. And the core is the radio access network and the evolved packet core. Grayed out here for today's discussion is the IMS, and that's what enables voice and other services on top of the data-only RAN and EPC. Once you have those components, you got to surround them with support systems. Those are backhaul, billing, provisioning, and element management system, and we'll touch on all those in our conversation today. But around that are things that we just can't go by necessarily. Devices and the device ecosystem, roaming and roaming partners, network sharing opportunities, availability of spectrum. Those are all part of the ecosystem, and we'll be talking about those as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wayman to take us through some details on the core network.
Thank you, Dean. I have prepared a few slides here just to give the audience here some high-level overview of the LTE network architecture. So the first slide here, the picture on the left-hand side, it's a traditional 3G network. We have our base stations, we have our base station controllers, switch and media gateways, and in this case, this is a CDMA network, so we have a PDSN here and a AAA. And then on the picture on the right, that's the new 4G, what we call the Evolved Packet Core network for LTE. So one of the main differences when you look at these two networks is obviously the EPC core is an all-IP network. It has a very flattened architecture which decreases the number of network element nodes when you compare it to a 3G network. And it also offers a very simplified architecture and open interfaces defined by the 3GPP standards body. Now it also offers a much higher capacity and better scalability. So for a lot of the rural operators in America, I think scalability it's one of the key criteria, because a lot of networks that the rural America carriers are running, they're not that large. It also gives a better intelligence on the control, because it separates the control plane and the bearer plane in the network. And it also introduces a much more sophisticated policy charging and control function, which can allow operators can introduce more services and applications such as QoS and things like that. Next slide, please. So in this slide, the picture shown here is the overall LTE network architecture with the red square bracket highlighting the Evolved Packet Core. Now, some of the major logical components inside this core network are the MME, which is the Mobility Management Entity, responsible for signaling control, bearer and connection management. Then we have the P gateway, which is the Packet Data Node Gateway, and this node is responsible for assigning IP to devices and connection to the internet. And then we also have the Signaling Gateway, which is responsible for the mobility and idle state management of a device. It can also support functions such as the lawful intercept. And then we have HSS, which is similar to the HLR in the 3G world, responsible for subscriber data authentication, QoS profiles, and access restrictions, and things like that. And then last but not least, we have the PCRF, which is the policy control function responsible for policy decision making and QoS authorizations. And the other two, we also have the LTE support system and the LTE radio access network, which I will get into the radio access network in the next slide. Next slide, please. Here's an example of how do we deploy an LTE scenario with either a CDMA or GSM and or a combination of both, understanding that a lot of the rural carriers, they either have CDMA network today or a GSM network today or a combination of both, understanding that there's a lot of roaming revenue that are being generated by these networks with the roaming partners that the roaming carriers have. So in step one, how do we actually do an LTE deployment? So obviously we want to preserve the revenue that are being generated from your existing network. So it will be logical to do an LTE overlay. And with the solutions that we have today, we can do a very simple overlay with a distributed architecture as shown here, which consists of remote radio heads and a baseband unit. And this baseband unit can possibly be embedded into your legacy cabinet where applicable. So once that is done, if you go to step 2 or 3, it really depends on what you have. You know, if you have GSM or you have CDMA, I think the question you have to ask yourself, is my current network capable of taking me to LTE? If the answer is no, then I think you will have no choice but to to do a swap or replacement of your network to preserve your existing revenue generation from these networks. So in this solutions here, in step 2, we can also introduce a GSM access technologies by simply adding additional radio heads and additional baseband units. Or in step 3, we can also add a traditional macro base stations, understanding that there might be some carriers out there who would like to preserve their existing coax cable runs to the towers and antenna and things like that, and they have space for an additional cabinet. So it's not absolutely you have to deploy a remote radio. You can also do it the traditional way as shown in step 3. So I want to recap. Step 1, we do an overlay. Step 2, it's a GSM swap out replacement, and step 3, we add CDMA. So if you look at step 3, this solution can offer a rural operator a single vendor equipment that can support 3 access technologies: LTE, GSM, and CDMA. Now, one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, how come there are so many radio heads? So the assumption that I have made here is that all these access technologies are being run on different frequency bands. That's why you see all these different radio heads for different technologies. It is possible to actually run, for example, a CDMA and LTE on the same frequency band, assuming that you have enough frequency to support it. For example, if you have a 10 megahertz PCS spectrum, you're only using 5 for CDMA, then you can use the other 5 for LTE. If that's the case, then we can support both technology with a single radio. Next slide. In this slide, I'm showing the possibility of actually outsourcing the evolved packet core. I think this will make sense and a good alternative solutions for a lot of the rural operators, because of the fact that by default you're not running a large network, so it might not make sense to actually invest a lot of capital and human resources to build your own evolved packet core network that you run yourself. A good alternative solution is actually to outsource it, or to let somebody else host the core network for you. So in this example here, and I think we see the logo here said Clear Sky. Clear Sky is one of the vendors that does the host the solution, and so there are a few other companies out there that do offer these type of solutions. And the benefits are you reduce your capital. Obviously, you don't have to worry about building a switch. Faster time to market, and you simplify your operations. Next slide. And some other considerations for rural operators in considering your network planning for LTE. Obviously, you have to ask yourself, are there a lot of demands in your areas that you're serving, right? So, and also roaming revenue for LTE is also a key, I think, especially for rural operators. And ecosystem maturity, which I think we'll get into later on later on in this presentation. And then cost and network scalability. So hosted solution will give you some leeway there in terms of capital. And then obviously one of the most important questions is timing for LTE build-out. When is the right time for rural America to build an LTE network? And then the deployment strategy, whether you want to migrate to LTE, and what is your migration strategy? And you want to do overlay first, or you want to have a couple of networks, CDMA or GSM or LTE running simultaneous for how long? So all those kind of things have to be planned and ironed out before you actually launch the network. With that, let me turn it back to Dean.
All right. So in the spirit of creating a complete picture of what you need to have as part of your LTE system, when you need to surround your core with a couple more components. A billing system is always handy to generate revenue with. Fortunately, if you're already in the packet data business, your billing system is probably pretty close to what you already need. Higher speed data suggest potentially more sophisticated data plans like 2 gigabytes a month, and then you charge extra for overages and those kind of things. But all of that is available in existing billing systems. And LTE will feed CDRs and other data into these billing systems with some integration effort. Provisioning, also same story. The the network that you're running might have an HLR. That's replaced in a LTE network with a very similar platform. So feeding those interfaces is some integration work, but within the realm of what's been done in the past. A little bit new is element management systems. These radio systems are way more sophisticated, have a lot more intelligence, and through an element management system you can not only check their health, but you can actually let them tune themselves, and they are in communication with each other and can do some very sophisticated network tuning completely hands-off, which is a big advantage when you're talking about these very high data rates and the sensitivity of those data rates to coverage. Backhaul deserves special mention as part of support systems, because with LTE it's probably pretty obvious that when you have higher speed users and more users on that tower, the backhaul can become a choke point. And as we've increased speeds in the industry, we're also increasing the reliance upon high-speed backhaul. Now, the amount of backhaul you need varies. It will increase, though, as we get more and more into voice over LTE, because in that case, while voice doesn't take a lot of data per se, it does require very high quality of service and very low latency. So you have to give voice priority, and that can have an impact on your overall bandwidth planning. So now we've covered the nuts and bolts of the network, the kind of things that you actually go out and write checks for. Now it's time to talk about the things we don't completely control, and we call that the ecosystem. When you're planning your network, you've got to take in mind and bear in mind all the components of this ecosystem. Certainly, as Wayman was talking about, you got to think about your current 2 and 3G network and how you're going to mate up your LTE efforts with that. You're also going to have to think about the devices, and we'll spend more time on devices. And those devices need to run on your LTE spectrum, but it also, ideally, they're going to run on your 3G spectrum too, because they need to fall back in places where you don't have LTE coverage. And then you have roaming partners, and it may be different roaming partners for LTE than they are for 3G, so that adds complexity to the mix. And then, of course, spectrum and licenses. Are you holding enough spectrum as a carrier? Do you need more spectrum? Is spectrum available that you can use? And then back to the devices. Do you have the devices available that's going to run on that spectrum? Now, kind of the one simplifying assumption, which eliminates a lot of these issues, is if a carrier is going to launch a fixed wireless broadband service where they're not too worried about mobility and they're mostly concerned about providing services to, say, sheriff's department's cars running around a given region, then a lot of these issues go away and it becomes a more viable strategy for an early launch, and we'll talk about that. First of all, what's happening with devices? Well, if we look at a worldwide perspective using data from GSA again, it's a very impressive picture. There's a very good chipset ecosystem going on which feeds the device providers, and so there's a lot of different players that are building devices. If we look at this data in 700 megahertz, for instance, there's 142 devices announced. Key word down there in the blue box. These are announced devices, not necessarily shipping, but it's still a great indicator of where we are with the industry. And you'll see the counts are really quite high. The issue in 700 and why that 142 is very deceptive is there's band plans that Steve mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that can eliminate devices from working on certain 700 bands while they work great on others right next to them. And this band plan issues really creates a barrier for these devices. But with that, the reality, the bigger picture good news is there is a lot of devices coming out for LTE, and so the long-term picture looks excellent. Near term, though, we have to be realistic. So what's available, especially in 700 holdings of rural carriers? Well, realistically, in this year, we're going to see mostly USB dongles, fixed wireless home gateways, MiFi devices, because those are relatively easy to pump out. They have a lot quicker development cycles, and we're going to see a wide variety of these kind of devices in the second half of the year. So that implies that a 2012 strategy could be fixed broadband wireless. As we roll into 2013, we're seeing more and more handsets coming out. Those chipset suppliers on the previous slide become very important to us because we need them to build multiple band support inside their devices. And so we should see the beginnings of decent phones like Android phones in the first half of 2013, running in these 700 bands that we need. And by second half of 2013, the world looks much more promising with multiple band, up to 4 bands in a device, and being able to support a nice mix of LTE spectrum. So when it comes time to roam, there's 3 big plays, Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint, of course. And I was trying to summarize them in this table here. So what are they using for LTE? Verizon's using a band called 700 upper C. AT&T has something called 700 lower B and C. Sprint has 800 and 1900. You can see their coverage points there and where they're at with their build-outs. From a roaming strategy and device strategy, Verizon has a program called LTE in Rural America, and that makes Verizon 700 upper C available to select operators around the country. And if they're part of that program, then they build the radio network, and that radio network connects back to the Verizon core, and there's some access to devices under that program. With AT&T, they've not announced any type of roaming strategy that we're aware of, and so far they've required exclusive agreements with their device manufacturers. So while there is some overlap in band usage, the manufacturers are not releasing devices to the smaller carriers. And Sprint has not announced either a roaming strategy or access to their device plan. Honorable mentions to Metro PCS because they are driving LTE on AWS bands, so devices are coming out left and right for them. Now, if we go one step beyond roaming, LTE is a very unique capability to share the radio access network. And it uses a technique called MultiOperator Core Network, or MOCM. And with MOCM, spectrum can be shared or they can be dedicated. So if you've got an operator on left side, there's a classic network diagram like we were just talking about a few minutes ago. In a shared MOCM environment, an operator has their own RAN and the other operator has their RAN, but there can be an area of common shared RAN. So only one of the carriers has to put up the capital and put up the towers. And then both operators' core networks can talk to and use that common shared infrastructure, which is a very powerful concept because each network operator sees their own subscribers and sees that common shared radio access network as their own. So it's an interesting concept that LTE offers the industry. Network sharing has a lot of good benefits to it. You can reduce the investment and rollout, reduce your costs, accelerate your rollout, regulatory benefits, and again, the operators can see their own networks with this. So with Verizon's LRA, they got about halfway there because they had the concept of the rural operators building a radio access network. But LTE would actually support the concept of that radio access network talking back to the Verizon core and also talking to that operator's core, and they could see each other's subscribers, which would be a very powerful concept for the industry and great for everybody involved. So when we think about the ecosystem, we would love to have an open ecosystem. And if we look at the Open Ecosystem Initiative, as we've coined the term, we've really got 4 wishes for our radio genie here, and that's access to fair and equitable roaming. We need access to the latest devices, not the second or third tier stuff, but the latest devices that consumers actually want. Not every rural carrier has the spectrum they need to cover the regions they need to make an economically viable model. So spectrum leases are very valuable. And again, Verizon got part of this right because they made it available, some of their 700 for certain operators in that area. So that's definitely the right idea with spectrum leasing. And then if we could have it all, it would be wonderful to have radio network sharing so that only one of several operators makes the radio investment, and then there comes up with an equitable way to share the revenue off those towers, but each core network gets to see that as their own. So we're working with the RCA to really press this open ecosystem into reality, and I encourage anybody on the call that would like to participate to join us in these efforts. So with that, it's time to turn it over to Steve Clark and to take us through some real-world examples, issues, and considerations for bringing up a LTE network.
Thank you, Dean. If you want to move me to the next slide. Grapevine's been fortunate in that we've had the opportunity over about the last 3 years to participate with several carriers in the analysis and evaluation of LTE designs. We've done RF designs with pretty much all the different radio gear that's out there. We've also been fortunate in helping with some of the backhaul design work, constructing some of the sites, and as well as assisting in the operation of some of these networks. So what I'd like to do is just share some of the key learnings with you that we've seen as we've seen different operators go through LTE deployment. As we've done, since, gosh, the 60s and the 70s, the network design begins with an RF engineering plan. A couple of new things that have come up with LTE, obviously, that are not necessarily new to the radio engineers, but they're new to wireless. Multiple input, multiple output radio and dual antenna configurations have been around for a while, but from a planning standpoint and an RF engineering standpoint, they model differently because it's a more complex encoding scheme. Looking at the radios and looking at the options that we have in terms of just our legacy coax versus fiber cable going up the tower with remote radio units, that coupled with the MIMO antennas gives us a potential to have basically zero line loss with the fiber going up the tower, and an antenna array per sector that gives us an ability basically to take our existing CDMA and GSM networks and kind of take them from a 2-lane highway to a 4-lane interstate. So it opens up the radio environment in a very big way, opens up the throughput in a very big way, and the subtle changes to the RF designs will require, some upgrades to your RF planning tools. It will also require that you get the specific radio configurations from the vendors that you're going to use so that you can properly model that. The antennas and the antenna configuration, the gains of the antennas, those are pretty standard and, like I said, what we've used for a long time. The other thing that has been, a fairly interesting task has been the review and renegotiate of some existing leases. Those leases and looking at the mounts on the towers, just trying to do the audits to prepare for the work that may need to be done has also been something that's been very valuable. I know as operators from time to time we've tried to understand and look at the value of doing tower top audits versus ground audits. My recommendation is that you do both in this case, especially if you have tower sites that are fairly congested with other operators on the same tower steel. We've talked a lot about backhaul and the size of the backhaul. The carriers that we've seen that have gone to LTE, even if they're only using it in a data-only mode today, like Verizon, they're putting in, the standard T1s are gone. They're putting in up to 150 megabit Ethernet pipes, mostly over fiber going into their sites. And obviously, some of the sites that are more remote, they're still using some of the IP microwave backhaul systems so that they can manage QoS across the microwave link as well as in the radio and the core. IP addressing, administration, and security. If you're like me and you're an old guy and you're a tip ring and E&M kind of guy, that stuff is really just about to go away. The IP addressing and administration now moves from the core all the way out into the radio cabinet and through the radio cabinet and into the devices, and will require, you know, as we've done in 3G, will require some administration, but now it's going to be more prevalent in some of the control planes and some of the things that we'll need to do in the switch room. So, you know, management of public and private IP addressing schemes, managing of the DMZs and the proxy servers and the firewalls is an absolute necessity with LTE. Billing and provisioning systems, you know, Dean mentioned a little bit earlier that LTE creates an application that allows you to connect, as we've done historically, from CDMA and GSM switches to the billing system. LTE does add some new fields to the AMA stream that comes from the billing system. So, you know, testing the billing system that you have with the LTE deployment that you plan is absolutely critical to make sure that your billing provider is able to accommodate the AMA stream. That's not to say they're not non-standard, because they are standard, but there are, as you guys have seen as we've gone through the years, you know, every new little wrinkle that you do creates, every new application in the switch creates new things in the billing system, and LTE is no different in that respect. As you look at the deployment of the architecture for LTE, there is, as Dean also mentioned, there is an architecture now that allows you to aggregate and run over longer distances with the core and the radio network. You know, some of the big carriers are aggregating, and you know, they've got, you know, one core that may serve an entire region at this point, and they're hauling all their LTE traffic into that one core. Certainly, when you begin to aggregate and you put more and more traffic on a single path or through single devices, you have to review, you know, what your risk tolerance is for the disruption of service if you lose some of that equipment. And in the event that you do lose it, then, you know, what is your recovery plan? Dean, if you give me the next slide, please. So just to summarize, the processes that we've historically used as we've come from analog all the way up to where we are today are the same processes that we will use to get from 3G to 4G. The focus that we have, you know, is to get the RF design done, the backhaul design, and IP security. Those are probably, that and the billing system are probably the areas where there's some of the more delicate things that you have to watch out for. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, voice now truly becomes an application on the network. And that's not to say that you know, you couldn't run voice today in an LTE network, but you can't run it with QoS until we get voice over LTE and a SIP client in IMS. So with that, you know, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And as I said, we've been through many of these deployments, and we'd love to work with any of you guys and answer any questions you've got. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Steve. So I hope this short presentation gave you confidence that LTE is definitely the future. Certainly the world has voted for LTE, and there's been, as we all know on this call, a lot of activity in the U.S. market as well. So whatever aspect of the industry you're in, you can be sure that heading down the path to LTE is not, there's two things. One is it's definitely the right road to follow. There is no other good alternatives, and but there's a few bad alternatives. But LTE is just the network of the future. And on that path, as Steve so eloquently put it, there's going to be some rocks in the road. And but the good news is that it's happening now. It's happening all over the world. Those operator deployments, those early guys have taken lumps, and very few of them are face down in the mud with the arrows in their back. They are making it happen, and that's helping us all. So in general, there's definitely struggles in our current U.S. environment with availability of roaming and devices and these ecosystem issues. I believe those can be solved. However, the bigger picture of the network, the technology, the capability, it's happening now, and it looks very, very promising for the industry. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jeff, and Jeff's going to put up another poll question for us and see what you think of what we've been talking about.
Thank you, Dean. Before I share the second poll, I do want to share the results of the first poll, which I'll do right now. We had over 600 people register for this webinar. We have over 300 people on the call. So if you look at the results from the first poll, when are you planning to deploy LTE? Over 22% said they're going to be deploying in 2012, with another 16% in 2013. So I think that's exclamation point around that certainly this is the path that a lot of carriers are pursuing. So with that, I want to move on to the second poll, which will present the question, which of the following represents your biggest challenge in deploying LTE? So we'll leave this open for 30 or 45 seconds for folks to vote on. And I will say that people on the call, please submit your questions. We've got some really nice questions in queue. We've got about 15 minutes left on the webinar, so we'll have an opportunity for some good Q&A. We will be distributing this presentation on the RCR Wireless website within 24 hours. And Dean, I got a good comment from the field that we should revise the presentation to include the speaker that was presenting during each section of the presentation.
Yes, we'll get that done before we distribute.
Okay, so I'm going to leave the poll up for another few seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and I'll present the results at the end of the call. So at this point, Dean, I'd like to, if you're okay, go ahead and move into the Q&A section.
Let's do it.
Okay. One of the more interesting questions I saw was how are carriers going to profit from LTE? So I would open it up to the group and unmute your lines and panelists kind of give your thoughts on how you see carriers profiting from LTE.
Well, I'll start with that one. So I guess the other half of profit is how not to lose in it. So I think we've talked enough about the fact that the industry is going this way, and over time it will be the only dog in the hunt. So there is a certain element of self-preservation. On the other side, on the profitability side, those Android phones and those tablets and those iPhones are coming out of factories like jelly beans, and they are making massive demands on the network. And realistically, certainly 2.5, but even the 3G networks are coming more and more to their knees due to their ability to handle that kind of data traffic. So the ability to profit from it is being able to take advantage of the higher data densities and being able to sell those higher speed devices with some confidence that your network's going to hold up to them, and being part of the leading edge of the industry, where you're capturing those more profitable higher end customers that demand good performance with their high-end devices. Steve, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess when I think about the question, as an engineer, it's kind of hard for me to really relate to profitability, but you know, I've looked at communications for about the last 15 or 20 years as trending towards two things, broadband and mobility. And the only question that we had 20 years ago was, when would the two come together? And I think they have, in the last 5 years, absolutely accelerated towards a complete integration of broadband and a mobility being the two key elements that customers require at the same time all the time. So when I think about that, I think that there are a lot of what I will call legacy telephone applications that have traditionally been wireline only that will develop into products that we can add mobility to and put onto the LTE network. The other thing I think that's interesting right now is that, you know, there is almost a viral trend for people to get entertainment through video streaming as opposed to going through the traditional broadcast networks. And, you know, everything I read about that says that that trend is going to continue. The browsers will get more sophisticated. And I guess I look at it and I think in terms of the share that an operator could get, and you know, I can remember 5 years ago thinking there's no way we'll ever need more than 2 T1s to a cell site. But now when I look down the road, see where we've come to and where we could go, I think that those types of applications, and certainly the value that that has to the consumer and what the consumer would pay for that, will move into an environment where you have broadband and mobility. So entertainment is going to move more into a mobile type of environment. I think legacy, what I'll call small business applications on traditional wireline telephone networks will move into a mobile broadband environment. So when you look at it, I think LTE and the capabilities of LTE allow an operator to broaden the suite of products that they could put in front of their customers. Some of them will cannibalize competitors in other areas. Some are going to be new. I certainly can't predict the new. I've been surprised at where we've come. But that's kind of my thoughts.
Okay. Well, we've got a lot of questions here. Unless anybody else has a comment on how to profit from LTE, I'd like to pose another question to the group. Okay.
Please do, Jeff.
Could you talk a little bit about when voice over LTE will be available?
I'll start, but I want to let Wayman talk mostly about this one. So actually, it's available today. It depends on what your definition is. So as a packet data network with good quality service, you can run Skype or other over-the-top voice services today. But that's kind of a Weasley answer. The real answer is the rollout of IMS. I'm going to let Wayman handle that.
Okay, Dean. So the question is when, like you said, Dean, I think voice over LTE is available today. The bigger question is, you know, is it a reliable network to offer to end users, right? I mean, if you look at our biggest carrier in the United States, Verizon, I think they recently just announced that they will delay the launch of the LTE nationwide into year 2013. And I think this is the second delay they have announced. I think they have realized that they need to have a very good and vast coverage on LTE on a lot of the areas before they can offer voice over LTE. There's a lot of complexity in offering this service. You know, customers are expecting good quality, just like a traditional cellular voice. So to answer that question, I think voice over LTE is still not prime time yet for deployment. We might be looking at another year or two before it's being rolled out on a big scale.
Okay. Thank you, Wayman. I'm monitoring many of the questions coming in, and I would say 50% or more ask about handsets. So I'm gonna ask questions of Steve Berry. Steve, what made the 700 megahertz auction unique in terms of handset interoperability? It seems like this time around, many rural carriers spent hundreds of millions of dollars on spectrum, only to find that they can't build on it because they simply don't have devices. So it strikes me as odd that that this particular auction is unique. And how did it happen versus previous auctions?
Well, thanks, Jeff. This is a classic situation where the technology existed, but the policy makers and the policy desire did not. the 700 megahertz plan was originally developed maybe 18 years ago by the FCC, and it was a lower and upper band 12 band. The band 12 was put to auction that way, and everyone assumed that if they bought the spectrum in the lower or upper band, there would be interoperability as much as the same that there was in the old CMRS, AWS, PCS spectrum. But what happened was AT&T and Verizon decided that they would be more innovative and create their own unique band plans within the lower and upper band plan. So you end up with band 12 carved out of there, AT&T band 17. The upper band was band 13, Verizon. Now they alluded to the fact that they thought there was interference, and that's why they carved their own peculiar band plan out. And whether that's totally adequate response or not, the fact of the matter is we've bifurcated the 700 megahertz in a way that it was never intended, and as Dean and others suggested, that LTE was going to be the uniting technology to bring CDMA and GSM together. And as a result, these specific band plans, you have different standards that the 3GPP, the International Standard Setting Body, created for band 17 and band 13, and band 12 is just now getting its own standards, in which they do. And one of the policy issues that RCA is extremely focused on is bringing interoperability first to the lower band 12, because we believe that the technical data and information is in now, and the FCC has sort of confirmed that in their own work, that you can combine 12 and 17, bands 12 and 17 in the lower 700 megahertz, and create an ecosystem that gives you devices that are cost-effective and accessible, and also gives you roaming partners. And as you know, as was alluded to earlier, you have to have fairly decent LTE coverage if you're going to have voice on LTE. We believe that our carriers, our competitive carriers, not only will build out the 4G LTE, but they will provide phenomenal partners with the larger carriers as we together build out LTE throughout the United States. And as you know, roaming is normally considered a revenue producer, not an encumbrance on the existing network. So that's how it created. That's how it happened, Jeff. And one of our goals right now is to undo it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. It's like buying beachfront property, not being able to build on it. And my understanding is that there's an FCC Build Requirement looming. Could you maybe, and this is for the group, talk about what do the rural carriers do who spent money on spectrum, and they give them the money to the government, and they can't build on it?
Well, let me start that real quick by saying that most of the carriers, RCA carriers, spent $1.7 billion on A and B's 700 megahertz spectrum, and they're having a very difficult time actually utilizing and building on it. There are some innovative things that you can do to protect your licenses. We've got a build-out requirement coming up of 35% here in 2013, and some reports to the FCC in that regard. And there are some fixed wireless LTE and or fixed wireless uses of 700 that could help protect your license. But we're pursuing a different avenue, not wholly exclusive, but we're pursuing a different avenue to get the FCC to expand and extend the build-out requirements so we can actually deploy the preferred LTE networks rather than a two-step process of deploying something to help protect your spectrum while you really want to be a 4G LTE provider. And so that hasn't played out yet, and we're working hard to make sure that you don't lose access to your spectrum because you're unable to build out with LTE devices and facilities. And I'll turn it over to the engineers on that comment.
Any comments from the group?
Well, I think that sums it up very well. The build-out date is June 13th, 2013, and the irony doesn't escape the industry of how lucky 13 is on this in this particular case.
Okay. Well, I have one final question, then we'll do wrap up for the group, where you'll have an opportunity to have a final comment. So the final question is, can you talk about the differences between building a macro LTE network and a micro LTE network that may or may not include Wi-Fi, and some of the handoff challenges that may exist as users go from macro to micro to even a Wi-Fi type network?
I think I can start that. I'll start up with some comments on that. So a macro network and a micro network in an LTE definition, they actually work. They actually are kind of complementing each other. I mean, depending on the area that you want to build. So obviously, for rural America, for some of the rural areas or even suburban areas, a micro or underlay, if you will, of an LTE network might not be as necessary as, for example, in the New York City or San Francisco area, where you have very densely populated terrain and a lot of subscribers, and that underlay effect will really help in terms of increasing the capacity in LTE. From the spectrum efficiency perspective, if you compare 4G LTE to some of the 3G technologies, bit by bit, I mean, they're really not a whole lot of efficiency. The efficiency comes in on LTE. It's first, you have a wider channel that will give you better efficiency, and then the second effect is actually by introducing the heterogeneous network, which is the underlaying effect, the micro layer and the middle layer. So to answer your question, I think you need both in order to be successful in the areas, especially in the very densely urban type areas, for your LTE network to be to be able to serve your subscribers.
Okay. Any other comments, Steve or Dean? Okay.
No, I think Wayman did a good job. Steve, you want to add anything?
No, I guess my reaction was that's a fairly complex discussion that I don't think I could do justice to in an hour, so I better keep my mouth shut.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to do now is share the results from the second poll, so everyone can see the results there. And while that's on the screen, I'd like to go around to the panelists for closing comments. Dean, perhaps you could start.
Well, thanks, Jeff. First of all, thanks for joining us today. All the panelists are available to you. We'll get these slides. We've got email addresses in the slide deck, so feel free to reach out to us. No question is dumb, and we are more than happy to act as a resource for you on an ongoing basis.
Wayman?
Yeah, my only comment is, we're living in a content-driven world, and LTE, to me, is an enabler to deliver, content anywhere, wherever, whenever. So LTE is here to stay, and I think we have a lot more opportunities ahead to work with folks from from the audience, the rural carriers, and we'll look forward to the challenge.
Okay. Steve Clark.
I'd just say I'd like to thank RCA and Dean and Wayman and Jeff, and at Grapevine we look forward to supporting the RCA membership, and if we can help in any way, give us a call.
Okay. Steve Berry, would you like to have any closing comments before I wrap up?
Oh, well, yes, and again, I would like to echo thank you for everyone for joining today, and the RCA members that participated in this, and RCR for helping arrange this briefing. Again, I put my plug in for the RCA show in Orlando. We're going to be focused on LTE and new and innovative pathways to LTE. I think everyone you heard here today is going to be there at the show. And we're going to have a lot of carriers, and some from Canada, some from Europe, but mainly every competitive carrier in the United States other than AT&T and Verizon will be there. If If you want to hear what's on their mind, come join us. Sign up now. March 2nd, you get early bird registration. So thank you, Jeff.
Okay. So Steve, can people expect to see a device available at the show?
My understanding is that by the end of the first quarter of this year, there should be a 4G LTE device that operates on band 12. I can't say anything more. I'm hoping that there will be more than one device, but quite frankly, some of the impediments that were discussed here today, and I noticed that your poll that you just put up clearly indicates that device availability is the most significant impediment out there. And until we get some solutions on the spectrum utilization, it's exceedingly difficult to get the OEMs to produce the device at any cost. So I think you'll see a couple. I'm hoping that they will be robust. I think we have yet to see a voice solution. So stay tuned. Come watch.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Closing comment from us. These slides will be available on the RCR Wireless website tomorrow. Steve mentioned that RCR will be holding a pre-conference session at the Spring Expo. We are taking applications for speakers, and we do have sponsorships available. The theme will be focused on LTE and small cell. If you have questions, please give me a call. So thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, please reach out to any one of us directly. Have a great day.